As a teacher, what is the saddest thing you found out about one of your students? One of my students confessed her brothers had been sexually harassing her. I've been a professional math tutor/business consultant who has been an autistic math savant for all of my life. As such, I am not bound by the same laws that pastors, medical professionals, teachers and many other professionals are bound by when it comes to dealing with children who may have been harassed. However, I generally use the same position as them. Many years ago I was informed of this by one of my precious students who was at that time 14 and in the 8th grade. She was a delightful child who always had a big smile. One evening as we met for math lessons, I noticed bruising on her arms and she was having a hard time sitting in the chair. I asked what was going on and she started crying. She leaned over and whispered to me that her brothers and their friends had been sexually assaulting her for about a year and a half. The most recent weekend had been the worst yet. Her brother had gotten into some money trouble with the local bookie and had used her the previous 3 days as a cash cow. He told her to not make plans for the next weekend because she would be helping him for the weekend. I asked her for the names for her 3 brothers and all his friends who had participated in her assault. Using a small recording device, I asked her to give me details about the guys. I also asked her to give me the names the guys had used to refer to each other. I told her I would handle it and she had no need to worry any further. I also asked her if anyone else knew what was going on with her brothers. She told me some names of others who had been involved, including a group of young women who would have used/abused her on a previous weekend. I'm viewed by people who know me as a gentle giant who tends to look like a biker's nightmare with a Wookiee appearance. Chewie is one of my nicknames. She asked that I not hurt her brothers. I promised her that I would never meet her brother, but I had some friends who would show them a proper road to travel on. That same evening I had a meeting at my club's house. When I left, each of my brothers on 2 wheels had a list of perps to have a chat with. By the weekend each of her harassers had been admitted to local hospitals for orthopedic surgery, physical rehab, neuroservices, tendon/ligament repair, skin replacement and torn/burned scalps. Urology repair was needed on every one of them. Dental services and facial reconstruction surgeries were in universal need. Because of scrotal damages, each of the men were now unable to breed, get an erection, or father children. It seems that when testicles are removed that this is the expected outcome. Not much different than gelding a horse. Broken/missing fingers and hands mean they wouldn't be using their fingers to harass another little girl. The city where all this happened never bothered to look into whether there had been any crimes against these men. The DA did receive a copy of the tape of my student's testimony. She was removed from her family and testified in each case against her attackers who didn't just plea out. My name was never mentioned. Eldest brother died in prison 2 years later, followed 3 years later by the baby brother and 5 years later by the middle brother. My young student is now grown with 3 beautiful daughters and 2 handsome little sons. Her kids call me Papa and are as sweet as their mom. Her hubby calls me Dad since his died many years ago. When did one of your significant others prank backfire horrendously? My boyfriend faked a proposal, so I broke up with him. I have been dating my boyfriend Andrew for 5 years now. We've had a healthy and stable relationship, up until today. Andrew has always been a prankster and makes jokes with me all the time, and I do it to him too, but today he took it way too far. In the morning he woke me up at 7 a.m. and told me to wake up because he wanted to take me to the spa. I was pretty surprised cause it wasn't a special day or anything, but I was all in for it. At the spa he told me how he wanted to go to a fancy restaurant after we were done at the spa, and that he was paying. Of course I agreed as we hadn't been out together in a long time. We then got to the restaurant. We had a beautiful and romantic dinner and just a nice time in general. We were talking about a house we were planning to move into and chit-chatted about other stuff too. After around 40 minutes Andrew stood up and got on his knees and took out a box out of his pocket. My heart stopped beating. I hadn't even predicted this. We have never talked about proposals before, but I also thought it was a great time now. He did a speech about how I was the most beautiful girl in the world and how he wanted to live with me forever and ended with, "Will you marry me, my princess?" Of course I said yes. Seconds later all that excitement turned into horror. He opened the small box I expected. He put the ring in and in it was a note saying, "You've been pranked." And Andrew started laughing hysterically. He continued with, "Baby, this was just a prank. I'm not ready at all to marry you yet." He was leaning in to hug me, but I gave him the biggest slap ever with tears streaming down my face. I just told him, "We're over, you fucking scumbag." I sat in my bed crying and I didn't know what to do. He was texting and calling me, but I didn't respond because I felt so sad, betrayed and mostly angry. I thought this was going to be one of the best days of my life. Then I woke up the next day and decided to call my now ex-boyfriend. I told him that it was over and that I didn't want to be together with someone who after 5 years still isn't ready for marriage and made a big joke about it. He cried and then turned angry and demanded me to stay and told me I was a effing a-hole for leaving him like this after everything he has done for me. He cussed me out so much that I stopped listening at one point, so I don't really remember everything he said. In the end we came to a sorta agreement that we are going to sell the house and that he will be sleeping in the guest room for now. So today I've just been scrolling the internet for apartments so I can have a fresh start. He is still not happy about the breakup though. He is trying so bad to get back with me, saying stuff the whole day like, "Can't we be together again?" And this was just a small mistake I made, but the one that did it for me was, "Don't be so effing petty and drop it. You know we are happy together and you know you still want me." When he said that, I absolutely lost it and called him every single name I could come up with, then slammed my door. I think he also told his family about this whole situation cause today I got a call from his mom telling me how selfish I was and how I couldn't handle a simple joke, and it ended with her calling me a slut and hanging up the call. After that I've gotten several messages from his other family members such as his siblings, his dad and even his aunt. I've tried to just block them all, but every now and then comes a new message. If you're a boyfriend reading this, never do this. You'll lose your girl in seconds. When did you realize your open marriage was a terrible idea? A week ago, I discovered my husband was on a dating app. He was showering and I had picked up his phone to order our taxi as the app was not working on my phone. The Tinder app icon covered my face on a screensaver photo of us. We were both 33 and been married for 2 years. I clicked on the icon and went through his profile. In his bio, he described himself as a single man looking for subtle fun. He listed his interests as music, movies, sports, reading and going to the gym. This almost made me laugh. This man had not been to a gym in his life but was one of those lucky individuals who seemed to be in naturally good shape despite eating an ungodly amount of trash. He also wouldn't be able to tell anybody where the nearest bookshop was. All his photos were from our holiday in Europe. He had cropped me out of every single one. He had several active chats with different women. I heard the water turn off in the shower and threw his phone back onto the pillow on his side of the bed. I told him I no longer felt like going out to dinner and he started yelling about how I always changed my mind about everything. I curled up into a ball and told him to leave me alone. Then I started sobbing and he let the towel fall from around his waist. He got dressed in the jeans and shirt I had picked out for him. He stormed out of the house. I tortured myself imagining himself going to meet another woman from the app where we had originally met. I called my sister, my mother and many of my friends. They all instructed me to leave him, and I insisted I could not. I simply loved the man too much. I wanted us to be one of those couples who grew old together and spent their twilight years knowing that they lived a life filled with love. I told myself that I would continue to let him use the app and have his flings as long as he always returned to me. I did not even plan to let him know that I knew. I did want to put him under more stress or inflict more guilt than he probably already felt. That's how much I loved him. My husband got home around 3 a.m. I could only smell beer and sweat on him. No perfume. He apologized for losing his cool and I said I regretted not going to dinner. We had sex and he fell asleep shortly afterwards. I slid his phone from under the pillow. My husband also did not know that I knew he used my birthday as the passcode on his phone. I used this fact to remind myself that he really did love me and then went back onto his Tinder. I took photographs with my own phone. His profile. His Tinder premium membership which gave him unlimited swipes. His matches. The messages they exchanged. The profiles of his matches. I slid the phone back under his pillow. Like I said, I did not mind my husband having his fun, but I wanted to know all about it. I parked outside the supermarket and looked through the window. I saw her at register number 7, the woman my husband had been seeing the most. The woman he saw on the night I discovered his presence on the app. She had served me many times while I bought food for me and my husband. Her eyes locked onto me as I walked through the door. I picked up a basket and shopped like there was nothing wrong. I picked out all his favorite foods, and wondered if she would recognize them. Their messages indicated they genuinely liked each other. They were more than just sex, but less than a romantic threat. They were friends with benefits. He had reiterated early in their exchanges that he had no plans to leave me, which made me very happy but did not dampen my curiosity about the girls he visited. I lined up at her register, although the case were shorter at others. She was somehow prettier in person. She was only 19. She had all the beauty and glow of youth. She told me she was sorry, and I saw a tear roll down her cheek. I noticed my hands had been shaking as I lifted the items out of the basket and placed them on the conveyor belt. She obviously sensed my knowledge of truth. I handed her a tissue from my purse and told her to pull herself together. I asked her what time she clocked off and after she answered I said I would pick her up. I warned her not to speak to my husband before our meeting. At 7 o'clock, I collected the woman. She shivered as I drove, and I put on the heating. I got us both milkshakes at the McDonald's driveway and parked at the entrance to the forest on the outside of the town. By now, her hands were shaking but I told her to relax. I promised I was not going to hurt her. I said I just wanted somewhere quiet where me and her could talk. She started rambling and I could not understand her. I insisted she calm down, have some of her strawberry shake and speak slower. She detailed how he said we had an open marriage. He had claimed I was also on the app and regularly seeing other men. She informed me that he met several women around town. I wondered how many people in my hometown thought I slept around and was in an open marriage. Although such spousal behavior may have enraged many people, my main priority was still retaining my husband and keeping my marriage intact. I explained to her that I did not want him to know that I knew. I told her that I did not mind her sleeping with my husband as long as she would never try to take him away from me. The teenager then started sobbing about how she could never possibly continue seeing him after this supposedly horrendous experience. I lifted my purse from between my purse, pulled out a fistful of notes and dropped them onto her lap. I asked her if this brought back his appeal. The sobbing girl counted the notes and wiped her eyes which dried remarkably quickly. She nodded quickly and pocketed the cash. I started the car and drove her home. I realized I was paying this woman to continue sleeping with my husband and I laughed. That night, as I laid beside my husband in bed and smiled at his cute snores, I felt satisfied. Although the cashier was the only one who sensed that I knew, I scouted out all the women my husband was sleeping with. I concluded each of them was worthy of such a magnificent man but would also not threaten our marriage. After 20 minutes of failing to sleep, I got an idea. Why not make his lies into truths? Why not let him know that I knew about his affairs, but did not mind? Then I thought he would not mind if I also had my fun on the side. I also felt certain this would alleviate any guilt he felt about sleeping around. I thought an equal playing field would equal a happy marriage. I downloaded Tinder on my phone and quickly set up a profile. I kept him in my pictures. I was certainly not ashamed of our now open marriage. I copied his interests exactly. I thought that was cute. In my bio, I described myself as a happily married woman who wanted a bit of fun on the side. The matches immediately came flooding in. The back of my phone started feeling overly hot and I briefly worried it would explode. I started conversing with a man 2 years older than me. That's one way I did differ from my husband. I could never sleep with anybody significantly younger. This man complimented my appearance and made me laugh with cheesy pickup lines. I agreed to meet him that night. I turned to tell my husband I was acceptive of unfaithfulness and was going out to officially make our marriage open like he had been telling everybody. I felt a tingle of stomach of how happy a reaction he would have. Then I decided to let my beautiful king enjoy his sleep and came up with an even better way of telling him the marvelous news. My Tinder match picked me up in his pickup truck outside our home. The neighbor's bedroom curtains twitched as the match drove off with me in the passenger seat and his hand on me. His house was on the other side of town and our hands got very adventurous on the way over while Taylor Swift played on the radio. I had never been happier in my entire life, and I felt my marriage had never been in a better place. We were both getting the thrill of new flames but also got to retain the love from our marriage. The man had a nice house on the other side of town. He poured 2 glasses of expensive wine and took me upstairs. We had a long, deeply satisfying time together. When he had finally finished, I asked for a selfie. I wanted a photograph to accompany the text informing my husband of the wonderfully legitimate openness of our marriage. The man smiled and stuck up his thumb. I tiled my head slightly sideways and stuck out my tongue. Immediately after I sent the text, my husband called me. I answered the phone with the biggest smile on my face, and immediately burst into tears when he said the word divorce. My son passed away 2 weeks ago. His last words keep replaying in my head. My eldest son was 16. He was my wife's firstborn and I adopted him at the age of 7, making him my only son at the time. I loved him as much as my other 2 boys we had later. He was my best friend for so many years, but definitely started to back off in his teens where he just became standoffish and just a teenager I guess. Anyway, on the 1st of April, his mom was heading to a town about 90 minutes away. He was awake and doing stuff around the house when she left around 10 a.m. I worked from home and was on a call until around 11:30 a.m. When I came out of the office I told him and his brother I was running to get us lunch. He kind of just nodded at me without saying much, which was normal. I got back to the house with the food around 12:20 p.m. He came out to grab his food but looked wobbly and his eyes were not focusing on me very well. He was also mumbling really low and sort of stumbled once. Immediately, because I am an idiot and an a-hole, I start asking him, "What are you on? Tell me what you took." And accusing him because it was so unlike his normal actions. He responded with nonsense answers. "I didn't steal anything. I bought at the computer store this morning," and then, "Oh yeah, I'm going for a drive later if you want to come," or something like that. He was completely out of sorts. So I grabbed his wrist to check his pulse. It was rapid as hell, that's all I remember. I couldn't begin to tell you the rate. He allowed me to check his pulse, but yelled, "Why are you restraining me?" When I did it, I told his brother to stay in the living room and took him into his bedroom. I sat him on the bed and told him to show me what he took. I can be pretty hard on my boys, but I swear on my life I was not at this time. I told him a number of times, "I am not going to be pissed. I just need to see what you're on so I can tell if we're in trouble here, and just show me the pills, buddy. Just show them to me." And he finally points to a Walmart bag on the floor. He said, "Everything I stole is in there." So I open up and dump the bag on the floor. It was all his school supplies we just bought like the day before, nothing pill-like in there. I know he isn't a pill user. I knew he never really left the house all summer. Why am I accusing him like this? It clicked then, he's having a stroke. I called 911 and asked for EMS. As I was on the phone, I went back to him and demanded he smile at me. He was kind of laughing and gave me a big smile and his face wasn't drooping or anything. Then I said, "Okay buddy, raise your hands." He gave a ha-ha, then said, "Raise the roof," and lifted his arms. They didn't seem to be weak, but as he started to sit back down on the bed he kind of fell, so I grabbed his hand in the kind of clasp and he squeezed mine tightly. Then he said it. His last words were, "Oh my god. Why is he in our house?" As he looked up over my shoulder, I know now he saw death coming and he was so effing scared. I grabbed his hand and told him repeatedly, "It's just me buddy, it's daddy. I am here for you. It's just me. It's just your dad." I couldn't even think of any other words to say. I knew he was scared, and I just tried to ease it. I held his hand and he held mine as he had that first seizure. I was quick to put him in the recovery position after the convulsions stopped. The paramedics were so fast, like 3 minutes after my call my middle kid was letting them in the house. When they arrived he was still breathing and in the recovery position. I put him in with the first seizure. He ended up having several more right after the paramedics got there, and during one he quit breathing and his heart stopped pumping. They worked on him for a long time and we hauled to the hospital once they got the compression machine on him. And still, by 1:50 p.m., my eldest son was dead at 16. His mother left the house at 10 a.m. with her son happy and healthy, and the next time she saw him at 2 p.m. he had died. She can't forgive herself for not being there. I can't forgive myself for being unable to help him and for being such a dick as to accuse him of taking pills. The tox screen came back negative for everything other than a trace amount of painkiller, which according to the coroner wasn't enough to make him take a nap, much less take his life. I remembered later I'd given him half of an ibuprofen. I think it was for his shoulder the day before. His cause of death still shows pending on the certificate and we won't get a full report for several months. Not knowing how it all happened so fast and knowing his last words were ones of fear and terror have been messing me up for almost 2 weeks now. People who have catfished on dating apps. When did the meetup actually go well? I was on one of my Amsterdam trips. I was in my hotel room using Grindr one evening. For those who don't know, Grindr is a gay dating application which can be used to meet guys in your area, and it shows the distance the guy is from where you are. I was talking to a guy who was about 1 mile away from me at the time. I had decided that I wanted to go out to a bar and have a few drinks. After 30 minutes or so of chatting, I gave the guy my Dutch cell phone number and told him to contact me if he wants to meet. Then I left my hotel room. About 10 minutes later, while I'm in the tram, I received a call. It was him. He said he wanted to meet now. I agreed, since I was only 4 or 5 stops away from my hotel. I exited the tram, went to the other side of the tracks, and took a tram back to my hotel. We met in front of my hotel. We then went up to my room. We entered, kissed for a few seconds, and then he said, "I'm sorry, this won't work out." I said, "Okay." Then he left. I was angry, annoyed, and felt like my time and money I had to pay for the to and return trip by tram were wasted. I knew that he took one look at me and decided he wasn't attracted to me, despite the fact that I put my height and weight in a full body picture in my profile. I decided to test out my hypothesis. While still in the hotel using Wi-Fi, I took my other phone, downloaded Grindr, and made a fake profile. I called it Visiting Amsterdam, and I uploaded a picture of a conventionally attractive white guy and said in the profile that I was visiting Amsterdam for a week. I let it sit on Grindr for a while, left my hotel, and went to the bar. The next day, I decided to use the fake profile to target that guy who wasted my time. We talked a bit. And I told him that I was staying in a hotel which was a few hundred meters away from me but closer to him. We set a meet-up time. He was telling the fake profile that he was at the hotel, and I was responding that I'm here in the lobby, and he said he couldn't find me. At that moment, I thought about going down and confronting him, but I was insanely scared. After a couple minutes of sitting there not replying, I decided to text him, "I'm coming down right now." When I walked down, he sat there in the lobby on the couch shocked. I walked up to him pissed. "See how it feels to have your own time wasted?" He didn't know what to say, but after a minute he told me this whole story about how his mother had gotten in a severe accident that night and that he just said it wasn't going to work out so he could leave immediately to go see her. I asked why he didn't just tell me the truth. It could have saved all of the BS that I did to get revenge. He told me that he just thought we would never see each other again, and he didn't want to have to explain something that I could have easily thought was a lie. It made sense when he said it, and eventually I apologized, him doing the same. We actually decided to get dinner and it went extremely well. That was 3 years ago and now we are married and are in the process of adopting our first baby. It's crazy to think that if I hadn't catfished him over my senseless urge for revenge, then I wouldn't be with him to this day. He still jokes around with me about it, saying things like, "You were way hotter in the profile pictures." While some might take that joke wrong, we have that kind of roasty humor so it doesn't bother me. This story is not some advertisement to just go around and start catfishing, but I just wanted to share a unique example of when it can work out. Students who had creepy professors, when did things go south? What I would like you to do is wear hot pants, knee-high boots, a crop top, and roam through the professor's lounge during lunch and offer more coffee, tea, and water. This was my job description for a work-study job in my second year of college. For those that don't know, work-study is a job on campus that directly pays off a tiny bit of your tuition a little at a time. I really needed this job. The job I had the year before was in the admissions office, and through some weird turn of events which I never could identify, this woman wanted me around the professors and college faculty dressed like that. Serving them. Dressed like that. Yes, it was a woman that wanted this from me. I felt it was wrong and unacceptable, and yes, this was the late 1970s when that type of dress was popular fashion, but what she was trying to do was use me to get the faculty to eat at her new faculty lounge on campus. In those days, male professors outnumbered female professors 20 to 1. This was an engineering college and it was a private college. I accepted the job because I needed it, but there was no way I was going to show up dressed that way. I showed up and she immediately had me change into a more form-fitting uniform. It wasn't long before some of the less dignified tenured professors began making conversation and sexist innuendos. I overheard one say, "Finally, someone around who has decent boobs." I felt so ashamed. I felt so ashamed to be a young woman. I felt so ashamed that they only cared about my looks and not about the fact that I lived in a corner of someone's basement for housing and that I only ate once a day because I couldn't afford to eat more often. I felt ashamed that I didn't have the clothing the other girls had there who attended, and there weren't that many girls on this campus. I felt ashamed I was outnumbered there by men and it was a woman who seemed to be betraying me by using me for her advantage. I was young. I didn't know who to go to for help. I showed up every day and served the drinks. A few weeks after I started, one mathematics/economics professor became more and more enamored with me. I was very shy and never made eye contact, but that didn't matter. He asked my name and recognized my last name as the same as a student's in one of his classes. The student was my father, and they had become friends. Small world. Every day, I began to learn what it was like to be outnumbered in an age of sexism that had not yet begun to even start to change, and every day it seemed I had to fight to prove myself. And it was wearing on me. I was getting so tired of it. One weekend, I decided to spend the night with my parents and siblings in a nearby town. The professor who had become obsessed with me was trying to find me at my address, which he had found in the admissions office, but I wasn't home. He got drunk. By the way, this man was 55 years old and I was 18, and showed up at my parents' house banging on the door. My dad opened the door and at first was confused. Why was his professor here at his home? The professor saw me and began to yell, "There she is, I love your daughter, she means everything to me." My siblings and I began to cry because we were so scared and my dad was furious at this man for hunting me down. He called the police and the professor was arrested. I never went back to that job on campus and the weird thing is that no one even called to find out what happened to me and if I was even alive. It was then I made my decision. I changed my major from the pre-med curriculum the next semester and enrolled in teaching, simply because in teaching I would not be surrounded by men. I had made the connection between that episode, and many others I experienced on campus, and this constant battle was just too much for me. I was just not strong enough. I wish I could have fought the good fight then for the future of the rest of young women all around trying to pave their way into a male-dominated profession, but I had been too traumatized. And for that, I once again felt ashamed. I still feel shame in it. I ended up loving teaching and enjoyed every bit of it. I just wish I would have been stronger so I could have pursued my dream of becoming a doctor. This was my worst experience of being a student. What did a close friend do to you that ruined the relationship forever? I was 17 at that time and had gone to attend one of my classmates' birthday party. It was an afternoon function and the party was sumptuous. Though we had our occasional differences, I was still on good terms with the birthday girl. Her dad is a very influential person in the hospitality industry and is a powerful rich businessman. He liked showing his wealth and he gifted her an Audi. Later that evening she insisted that I and 3 of her friends join her for a ride in her new car. I thought it would be rude if I declined her, so I reluctantly agreed. She was on the wheels and was a good driver. It had rained that afternoon, so it was a pleasant evening. We had rolled down our windows on her instructions. Now there was this couple going on their scooter with a young girl. She was around 6 to 7 and they looked like a below-average family trying hard to survive on their limited income. The little girl was wearing a white frock and her parents' clothes looked old. She was driving aggressively and we almost collided with their scooter. It barely missed. The uncle confronted us and told us to be careful. He was polite and in no way rude to us. It was our mistake and he was right to point it out. After all, the road doesn't belong to our fathers. I thought it had ended there, but I was mistaken. So now our princess took this as an offense and she followed them. There was a pothole filled with muddy water because of rain. She intentionally drove into that pothole, splashing the couple with muddy water. She hurriedly drove off before any more confrontation. I did manage to look back and could see their clothes were completely ruined. The little girl broke down in tears. I reckon it was her only new dress and we had ruined it. We had wiped out her smile and she was crying. I still remember her face, which made me cry. This was a couple who were barely surviving on minimum income. They would have saved every penny so that they could afford a new dress for their daughter. We not only ruined her dress but also their evening. And I was fuming, just waiting till we got back to her house. I wanted to confront her but felt it was not the right time. We reached her house and she got down from the car smiling. No remorse or regret on her face. It does not end here. She had the audacity to ask me about that incident. She thought I might admire her for that maneuver. I was not going to hold back anymore. I did let her know that she was nothing more than a vengeful bitch who deserves to rot in hell. I am not a racist, but I did make comments on her look. And I was harsh. And I have no regret in body shaming her. She broke down into tears and went in. I called up my driver to come and pick me up. We have crossed paths many times since then, as we have a lot of mutual friends. It has almost been 5 years since that incident and we have had no conversations. I still hate her and I am sure she dislikes me as well. But there is someone out there who hates both of us even more. I am sure that little girl and her family would have still not forgotten about that evening when a few spoiled rich girls ruined their evening. When has a parent come crawling back for help after destroying your life? I lived with my single mother since I was 14. My parents divorced after years of fights and arguments that I soon became accustomed to. It got to the point that I thought all families were like this. After the divorce, my father moved away to France and, from what I heard, started a new life and family over there. I, on the other hand, stayed with my mother, who remarried again, this time to a rich and successful businessman with 2 grown-up children, twins who were 2 years older than me. We moved to their house, which was this large and expensive-looking mansion with a lot of rooms, with tons of artifacts for decor that only rich people have in their house. You would think my life would become better now that I'm living in wealth, but it was the exact opposite, and every day I wished that I had gone with my dad instead. My mother was negligent to the point that sometimes we wouldn't see for days and she would probably forget that she had a daughter. All she cared about was going to elite events with her husband, wearing expensive clothes and just swimming in money. It was only about the money. Meanwhile, I was approaching my sophomore years in high school as this awkward and lonely girl with no real friends, who got bullied constantly and was suffering from depression and anorexia nervosa, and it was so obvious, but somehow no one, not even my mother, saw this. Life with my step-siblings wasn't good either. My stepsister, Jane, took pleasure in humiliating me and constantly reminding me that I'm not of their class and my mother is just another gold-digging hoe. She would trip me, push me, shove me, and when I tried to complain, my mother would take her side and shush me. "What are you trying to do? You want to end this good life for us?" That's what she always said, when she's the one with the good life. My stepbrother, Jake, didn't really do much to me. He mostly ignored me like I didn't exist, which I was grateful for, but none of them cared. The only person who cared that I regret ever listening to was my stepfather's brother. I'll call him Isaac. Isaac was this always smiling typical playboy who was oddly interested in me for some reason. He would come around often, try to sit with me, talk to me, and it was really uncomfortable. He promised that he cared about my well-being and he was going to talk to my mother about my eating disorder and what I was going through. It was that promise that kept me close to him because I really needed help when my mother was ignoring me. She believed that as long as I got allowances she gave me every month, I would be okay. I was in the 12th grade when my mother and her husband celebrated their 5-year anniversary at the house. By that time, Jane and Jake were at Cambridge already, and they weren't home since it was in the middle of the semester. This meant I was the only kid in that house. It was that day that Isaac lured me to a guest room on the pretense of wanting to talk to me about how I was doing, and then he essayed me. I honestly don't remember what happened. It was mostly a blur. Several times he did it to me and left me there as I slipped into unconsciousness from the shock. When I woke up, I was in my room and my mother was sitting next to me, looking at me with a slightly worried expression that I've never seen from her before. I know she knew what happened because she changed my clothes and asked if I was okay. That moment I cried and threw myself in her arms and told her everything. She patted my head and told me it would be fine, then reached behind her and brought out a new dress and told me to hurry up and wear it so we could go outside for a family photo. My stepfather was waiting. I couldn't believe what she said to me or how she was acting. I had just gotten SA'd and she was more worried about keeping face than my health. I tried to struggle but I was too weak. She made me wear the dress and go downstairs to take the pictures with them. Throughout the whole ordeal, I was crying and my mom was constantly telling me to smile, clean the tears and look normal. The aching between my legs made them wobble as I tried to stand, everything hurt and I felt like I was going to fall soon. My mother was there, even standing with Isaac and faking smiles around. There were a lot of people and it was like a huge event. Soon it was time for me to give a speech for my parents and immediately as I stepped on that stage, my eyes caught Isaac's smiling ones and I just let go. I screamed about what happened to me, about me being SA'd and about my mother not even caring enough. I was going to go all out to everyone there if I had not been pulled away by the help and then by my mother and dragged into the house. Immediately we were out of sight, she slapped me. Right across the face. She yelled that I didn't know what I had done. She kept talking about what people would say. The thing she kept saying the most was about her husband and how she didn't want him to get upset. I honestly could not believe my mother was acting this way. As she scolded me, my stepfather walked in angrily and grabbed me by the front of my dress. When I tell you that this man beat me, he beat me up in front of my mother and she just looked away. He punched and slapped and after I had bruises all over me, he told me to pack my bags and get out. He said I was a lying and manipulative bitch, who was never content with the good life and was looking for a way to bring him down by using his innocent brother. That evening, after everyone left, I was kicked out. I was homeless and went from shelter to shelter just to be able to rest my head and get something to eat. I barely managed to graduate from high school but I did. My mother had my phone number but she never called, not even once. After weeks, I got a job at a fast food joint and managed to save enough for registration fees to apply to colleges. My coworkers and boss were kind to me and offered a little support and I was allowed to sleep in the back room of the fast food joint after I almost got assaulted again at the shelter and made it out with a black eye. I studied hard and took extra jobs just to survive and luckily for me, I got accepted into the University of Chicago on a full scholarship grant and financial aid. I took all I had and bought a flight ticket to get there. It was hard but I managed. When I got there, I took on campus jobs to be able to keep myself and was managing quite well. I tried to forget about my past, my mother, and about everything I had gone through and focused on building myself. I went to the free therapy classes and it was good for me. I even began the journey of tackling my eating disorder, little by little. It was during my last semester as a sophomore that I ran into Jake. It was a surprise especially for him. He did not expect to see me there and invited me for coffee. Strange but I agreed. It had been 3 years since and he heard what had happened when he went home last and he was very sorry that I went through that. I couldn't believe that he wasn't on his father's side. I guess Jake wasn't that bad of a person anyway. Jake told me a lot of things. He told me how his sister got into an accident during the past year and had been confined to a hospital ever since, in a wheelchair. He said his father's business is depleting and he had gotten divorced from my mother. He also told me that he had left that family for good after graduating and was starting his life here in Chicago. The only person he would keep contact with is his sister. I couldn't believe it, honestly. All this happening. Jake apologized a lot for everything and believe me, I held no grudge against him. He took my phone number and we agreed to have lunch in a few days. When the time came, we had lunch but we were not alone. Jake had brought his friend, Thomas, a year older than me along. Thomas was a practicing psychologist and Jake had asked him to help me with free therapy sessions so I can tackle my disorder and trauma once and for all. In this way, I began to see Jake as a brother. We had both matured and I was grateful for his help. I had also become really close to Thomas and soon enough we began dating. Jane, my stepsister, passed away sadly after a few months of struggling. I couldn't attend the funeral because I didn't want to see anyone from that family, including my mother, and Jake understood. I worked hard at school and graduated with a degree in finance. It was then that Thomas proposed to me and I accepted. We got married soon after and Jake was the best man. His own fiancée, a very lovely girl, was my bridesmaid. As a wedding present, Thomas did the unimaginable. He managed to track down my father and flew him in from France for the reception. I couldn't believe it. I was in tears that day, and I hugged him harder than I ever could when I saw him. Turns out he had been trying to reach me all these years but my mother did not allow it. I got to meet his family and his lovely wife. I was happy and content after so many years and was glad for all the good people in my life. Thomas and I bought a house close to Jake and he and his fiancée helped set up. It only took a few days and soon it was done. One of those days, Thomas and Jake went to town and I was left alone at home with Jake's fiancée. I was a few months pregnant at this time and she insisted on helping around the house. We were both in the kitchen when the doorbell rang and I went to go check it. Right before me, looking extremely disheveled, was my mother. I was shocked and could not talk for a few minutes. I couldn't believe this. She tried to hug me but I moved away from her. The anger of all the years returned to me as I stared at her. She sobbed at my doorstep and begged me to forgive her, telling me how her husband divorced her and she got kicked out with nothing and she's been struggling since and she was homeless and had nowhere to go, until she heard I was doing well and looked for me. Not once did this woman try to apologize for everything she did to me and let happen to me. She was as selfish as usual and only came because she needed something. When she asked to stay at my house, I laughed hard. She was shameless, she was selfish. I told her everything I had in my mind, that I am glad karma has caught up with her and her husband and soon enough, Isaac. I told her she was not part of my life, that only included my husband, our unborn child, my brother and his soon-to-be wife, and my father. She was just a stranger that I wanted to leave my property immediately. Can you believe she tried to turn it around and call me an ungrateful daughter? When she refused to leave, I called the police and watched them drag her away, far away from me.